All right, so what we're going to be talking about today is the cell. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today is the cell. So we're going to be looking at the parts of a cell and all of the organelles and all of that stuff that you guys have been doing some learning about. So the first part of the cell that we're going to talk about is the cell membrane. And the cell membrane is the part that surrounds all cells. So it's a flexible covering and it protects the inside of a cell from the outer environment. This is what a picture of what they think the cell membrane looks like. So what it does is it controls the movement of materials into and out of the cell. So it decides what can come in and what can go out of the cell. It's considered what we call semi-permeable. So what that means again is that some things can come in and out, but not everything. So only some things get in. And it contains two main parts. The first are the proteins, and the second are the phospholipids. We're going to talk about phospholipids on the next slide. So right now we're going to talk about the proteins. So proteins are part of this cell membrane. And if you look here in this picture, the proteins are being shown with these big red blobs. So there are four types of proteins in a cell membrane. The first one is the cell surface marker. So it's the one that identifies the cell types. I kind of think of the cell surface marker like the name tag. It says, hey, this is what I am. So it tells the name, or it tells what kind of cell it is. The second one is the receptor protein. So this one recognizes and binds to substances outside of the cell. So you can kind of think of this one like your friend. So when you walk by, your friend says, hey, I know you, and grabs hold of you and brings you over, right? So that's kind of what the receptor protein does. It recognizes things going by, grabs onto them, and holds on. The third one are the enzymes. And the job of the enzymes is to help with chemical reactions inside the cell. So it's like gonna speed things up and make things happen inside the cell. And then the fourth kind of protein is the transport protein. So the transport protein is kind of like the bouncer at the door. Like it decides what, or it helps things move across that cell membrane. So it transports things. So there are two types of transport proteins. The first one is called a carrier protein. So carrier proteins are going to carry big molecules through the membrane. So they kind of like piggyback them through the door. So they carry things. The second kind are the channel proteins. And channel proteins form like a tunnel or a pore through the membrane so that different substances can move through that pore. Kind of like a culvert, I guess, in a road. Lets things pass under the road. So that's kind of what a channel protein does. It lets things pass through the membrane. So the second part of a cell membrane, so we've got the proteins we just talked about. The second part is the phospholipid. And a phospholipid is just a lipid that contains a phosphorus. And there are two parts to a phospholipid. So this would be a picture of a phospholipid here. You can see the phospholipids that they're showing you in this picture. I've got some drawn here. So two parts to the phospholipid. The first part is the lipid, and the lipid is the tail end of the phospholipid. So this part right here, like the legs. And it is what we call hydrophobic. So it's water hating. So it is repelled by water. So it doesn't want to be in contact with water. It will turn away from the water. Remember we talked in the last section about how lipids don't dissolve in water. So that's what this is all about. This is those lipids getting away from the water. They don't want to be in the water. They don't dissolve in that water, so they just don't want to touch it. They're hydrophobic. The second part is the phosphorus. And the phosphorus is the head end. So that would be this little circle up here, and the circles on this one, and the circles on this one. So they are hydrophilic, which means they are water loving. So they're attracted to the water. So they want to touch the water. So in this picture, you can see we've got water on the outside of the cell, water on the inside of the cell. So you've got these phosphoruses lined up so that they can be touching the water, right? And then the lipids are lined up so that they're away from the water. And so we call this arrangement the lipid bilayer. So it's this double arrangement, which is the lipid bilayer. And then, of course, embedded in the lipid bilayer are these proteins that we talked about on the last slide. Okay, so those are the parts of the cell membrane. Now we're going to move on and talk about other parts. So the next part we're going to talk about is the cell wall. Now the cell wall is not present in all cells. It's just present in plants, fungus, bacteria, and some protists. Animal cells never have a cell wall, so you won't ever deal with a cell wall in an animal cell. These are in plants, fungus, bacteria, and then some of the protists. So the cell wall is just a real stiff structure outside of the cell membrane. Remember, cell membrane is nice and flexible. The cell wall isn't. It has a lot of structure. This is why things like plants and fungus don't need to have skeletons, because they have this cell wall which helps give their structure. So it also protects the cell and then helps give that cell some shape and support, like I just said. The next part is an appendage. Now, not all cells have appendages, but some do. And cell appendages are used for movement. And if you look at this picture, you can see the flagella here, which is a cell appendage. And in this one, you can see these little green hairs. Those are called cilia. Those are an appendage. So the flagella is a long and tail-like structure, so like these right here. And they whip back and forth to move the cell. So that's how the cell then gets moved along, because this flagella is whipping back and forth and whipping back and forth and moving that cell forward. Cilia are these little tiny short hairs, and they're going to wiggle, wiggle, wiggle and move the cell by wiggling, or move things away from the cell by moving those little hairs. So those are the two cell appendages that we're going to talk about. But again, not all cells have cell appendages. The next thing we're going to talk about is the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm is the fluid inside the cell. So it's mostly water, but it's located inside the cell, and all of the other stuff that's inside the cell is kind of suspended in it and floating in that cytoplasm. The fifth part is the cytoskeleton. And you can see a picture of the cytoskeleton here, and then here you can see the green in this picture would be cytoskeleton. The blue is the nucleus, but then the green stuff that you can see here is cytoskeleton. And it's just a network of thread-like proteins in the cytoplasm. So what its job is to form a framework in the cell that helps give that cell some shape and then helps it be able to move a little bit too. And then finally, the last thing we're going to mention are the organelles. And organelles are structures that carry out specific life functions in eukaryotic cells. And we kind of already mentioned organelles before a little bit. You guys know a little bit about them because you've studied a little bit about them before, but we will be talking more and more about those coming up.